Hello and welcome to Real Leadership Connections, Part 4 in the Leader Within webinar series presented by Blue Point Leadership Development. My name is Julie Henry and I'm glad to be with you today. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Leader Within webinar series, Blue Point's 5-part series, which is drawn from our highly regarded workshop of the same name. Today's webinar is Part 4 in the series, Real Leadership Connections, Becoming Important to People. Our guide today is Greg Thompson, a facilitator, coach, and speaker with a passion for developing the greatness in individuals and organizations. As president of Blue Point Leadership Development, Greg leads a talented group of professionals who design and deliver challenging educational experiences that accelerate the natural development of leaders. Greg is the co-author of The Power to Lead and The Leadership Experience. He is also the author of Unleashed, The Leader as Coach. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Julie. And I'd like to welcome all the attendees onto the call today. I'm honored to be your guide on this fourth in a series on leadership and emotional intelligence. To start our discussion off today, I just wanted to share a quote with you from Wilfred Peterson. And here's the quote. "Walk with the dreamers, the believers, the courageous, the cheerful, the planners, doers, the successful people with their heads in the clouds and their feet on the ground. Let their spirit ignite a fire within you to leave this world better than when you found it." I'd like you just to sit with that quote for a moment and be thinking about what that means to you. Maybe be also thinking about how you feel about that quote, how you feel in this moment. Now, I shared that quote with you because it's something I particularly like. It's a quote that I like. I think it speaks to us as leaders. It speaks to us as members of communities. It speaks to us as creative, risk-taking, adventuresome people. It also speaks to us about the topic that I'm going to share with you today, this idea of leadership connections. Over 75 years of research in social psychology, that's the science of how people interact. Over 75 years of research in social psychology has told us that people make decisions not by rational argument, but by emotional argument. Then they shape a rational argument to support that emotional argument. There is nothing I could possibly do to convince you rationally through the course of our conversation here today that leadership connections are important. Yes, you can understand my rationale, you can understand my words, you can understand the logic or lack of logic in a point that I will make. The however is this: none of it will touch you, none of it will be remembered, none of it will matter unless I can connect with you on an emotional basis, unless you see this at some feeling level as important to you. The reason that I opened the conversation today with this quote is because this quote to me, when I read this quote, when I see the imagery associated with that, evokes an emotion in me. It gets me thinking about this idea of leadership and meaning and how one makes the connection really between head and heart and the like. And so it's my hope that this also has evoked that for you, and that as we continue to have a conversation and I share some slides with you, that you just simply dive in, both rationally and emotionally. The big question that faces us and that we continue to explore as leadership development specialists, and my guess is of concern with many of you on the call as well. And we have been exploring this question in different ways as we have looked at this idea of leadership emotional intelligence. And the big question is this: why do some leaders atrophy while others thrive? And we see it throughout all of our organizations. We see otherwise talented men and women, very bright, very experienced men and women, not succeed as leaders. And then we see others who sometimes may not have the same natural gifts really thrive as leaders. And we look at this idea of leadership emotional intelligence as the #1 cause of both leaders atrophying and leaders thriving. Let me just give you a quick overview, really a review of what we call a study of the leader's brain. This is a oversimplistic view of how we process information in our brain. So if you recall this imagery, this image is schematic of the brain from our previous webinars, you'll remember that we really have these three parts of the brain. We have the brain stem, where our minute electrical signals come into the brain. We have the amygdala, which is really in the middle of what we call the limbic system. This is the emotional center of our brain. And we have the neocortex. And the neocortex is the upper, thinking, rational, smart part of our brain. And essentially, what leadership emotional intelligence is when the amygdala, the emotional part of our brain, and the neocortex, the cognitive, language-creating, thinking part of our brain, are on good speaking terms. All leadership is personal. This is a fundamental principle to this idea of leadership and leadership connections. I had the wonderful opportunity of having dinner with Marshall Goldsmith last night. Marshall is a very noted, renowned leadership coach, author, and speaker. And he asked me, he said, Greg, what are you doing today? And I had mentioned that I was sharing this webinar on the topic of leadership connections. And he told me this. He says, Greg, tell him this. In my opinion, leaders who cannot make real connections with others, who cannot be influential with others, cannot teach and be taught by others, are not leaders at all. They simply are coordinators, regardless of their level in the organization. Great leaders arouse our limbic system. So when you think about this, great leaders have always had a story, had a message for us, had a way of engaging us on the emotional level. As I had mentioned before, that we really make decisions emotionally. Those minute signals hit the emotional part of our brain, the amygdala, before they hit the neocortex. Those of you who have been involved in interviewing people will, if you're truly honest with yourself, will likely agree with this statement. When we interview somebody for a new job, we decide first with our emotional selves. And then, if we decide we like somebody and they like us, we make stuff up on the rational side to support the emotional decision we've made already. I've seen it happen many times with myself. Early in my career, I was in the executive search business, and so I basically was in the interviewing business. And as I look back on my career, I can see now why I was making decisions. I would have a conversation with somebody who would arouse my limbic system on a positive way. They made me feel positive about them or myself in some way. And I would go out of my way to make their resume fit the job. And I believe we all do that. I believe that we make these decisions on an emotional connection with people, and that it's through this emotional connection that we influence and make decisions about other people. If we look at this from a leadership emotional intelligence perspective, I just want to give you a review of the 4 dimensions that we believe leaders can and need to focus on if they want to accelerate their development in the emotional intelligence. The 4 dimensions are this. First and foremost is personal awareness. Really understanding what is unique about you, your emotions, your triggers, what are the traits and characteristics, both emotional and personality traits and characteristics that really make you who you are. Secondly, it's about becoming a master of yourself, a captain of your own ship, captain of your own emotional ship. Not denying your emotions, but recognizing them, understanding them, and making choices about your actions and reactions to those emotions. Today, we're going to look at this idea of leadership connections. It's the 3rd element in leadership emotional intelligence. And in our next session, we're going to talk about influencing others, how we can use our emotions and the emotions of others to have a broader, powerful influence in our organizations. So let's look at this idea of leadership connections. And I would invite you to do an exercise with me just to start this module off. What I would ask you to do is to think about 2 leaders that you've worked for. And I'm going to ask you in a moment to write their names down. So if you grab a piece of paper and a pen somewhere, and I'm going to ask you to write these names down. The first leader I'm going to ask you to write his or her name down is a leader that really brought out the very best in you. A leader that it was maybe part of a project or a job or an assignment that really was very special for you. You felt special. You worked at your very best in that job. So I'd like you to write the name of that leader down. Now I'd like to, on the same piece of paper, I'd like you to write down the name of another leader. I'd like you to write down the name of a leader that you consider to be ineffective. A leader that you believe has missed the calling of leadership. You may or may not have worked for this leader, but if you did, this leader would have not brought out the best in you. You've probably struggled to work with this person. You probably did not look forward to each day that you would go into work and to work with this person. I'd like you just to write their name down. Now, I'd also caution you if you're listening to this webinar in a classroom or you're working with your team or something, and this person happens to be in the room, I would encourage you to use a pseudonym for that person's name. Now, under the first person's name, what I'd like you to do is to write down the unique qualities of that person. What was special about that person? What were they all about? What did they do to bring out the very best in you? And then do the same for the other person. What were the qualities of that person that made them a leader that was ineffective, made them a leader that didn't bring out the best in you, a leader that you had to struggle even to come to work each day because of that person? So write those qualities down under that person's name. So now, as you do that, this is an exercise that literally I've asked of thousands and thousands of leaders. And typically, here are the kind of comments we get under the great leader's name. This person cared for me. I felt like I was special. This person really engaged and inspired me. This person treated me with respect. Now, my guess is many of you will have similar words under that person's name. Under the other person's name, typically here's what I hear. The person was negative, demeaning, was not really interested in me. I felt like just a cog, just a pawn. The person really couldn't be trusted. They really seemed selfish much of the time. My guess is your list might parallel that as well. There's no magic, there's no mystery in this idea of leadership. We know what great leaders do. We know also what ineffective leaders do. Here's the haunting question for everybody on this call today. Which column are you in? Which column do you want to be in? The really good news here is that we all can make these powerful connections. If you look at these words, I didn't define the great leader or the ineffective leader for you. I shared with you some of the responses that I've heard in the past. But this idea of leadership is a very personal thing. The words that I used are very much about being able to have that personal connection, being able to be seen at one's very best, and corresponding with that, that's when we bring our very best to the work. So the cool thing is we all can do this. What I have found, my colleagues at Bluepoint have found over our years working with leaders, is every one of us can increase our ability to be in that great column, to be able to make real leadership connections with other people. Whether or not we're introverted or extroverted, outgoing or reserved, we do not need to have a specific set of interpersonal skills. We all can build those strong leadership connections. When we look at the idea of leadership connections, it really is about understanding that for many of us, this always doesn't come natural. There are many things, I'll talk about it in just a minute, that get in the way of us making those leadership connections. So I would really encourage you to be thinking about this as a leadership discipline, as a very, very important leadership discipline, but a leadership discipline nonetheless. It is something that we all can increase, and we all need to be intentional about. One way of looking at leadership is really illustrated by the quote that's on your screen now. If you can do it yourself, your dream is too small. If you can do it yourself, your dream is too small. So if we pull that back a little bit and think about, okay, what does that really mean? To me, what it means is whatever's on our plate, whatever our tasks are, whatever our challenge ahead of us is, whatever opportunity we're facing in the moment, if we can do it ourselves, then we are individual contributors. We're not leaders. The tasks that most of us have ahead of us are enormous. And we probably can, as we grow as leaders, can probably even make them larger. So if nothing can get done ahead of us, none of the real exciting things can get done on our own, then we really need to connect with others. So how do we really engage people? How do you really get people to buy in? How do you inspire people? How do you really get people to sacrifice themselves, sacrifice their own interests to some degree, for something that may not even be their dream yet? How do we make that kind of connection? It's my hope that as we go through this conversation here today, that some of this will become clear to you. I would encourage you to make a few notes as we go through to look at some of the specific practices you can employ to increase the capacity to make these key leadership connections. One of the core principles about leadership connections and making these connections comes from the understanding that a leadership connection is also an emotional connection. We cannot connect only on some rational level, though many of us would like to. So when you think about this, if you look around your organization and the people that you work with, in a moment I'm going to ask you to select a few and then to do an assessment on the quality of that connection. Here is one of the most important principles of leadership connections. There is no neutrality. Nothing is neutral. Every leadership connection you have is either positive or it is negative. It is either positive, which means it is adding to your leadership. It is advancing your team, your objectives, your organization in some way, or it is detracting from it, it is taking away. We as leaders don't get away on any free pass. We don't get away with a pass of neutrality. So number one, it's important to note that if left to their own, a leadership connection will naturally gravitate to the negative. They will naturally gravitate to the negative. So we as leaders need to be intentional and need to be consciously creating positive leadership connections throughout our organization. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the pathway to these connections, how we get there. Now, to start this off, I would challenge you to think about this. Here are 3 questions. Do others believe, for you personally, do others believe that you really know them? Do they believe that they know you, who you are? And third, do they believe you care about them? These are 3 simple but very profound questions. Do they believe that you know them? Do they believe that they know you? And do they believe that you really do care about them? The 3 fundamental questions that are at the foundation and core of all leadership connections. But it's tough. It's particularly tough these days to build these leadership connections. So what gets in the way of the connections? What makes it so difficult? Well, first and foremost, I believe it's this idea of freneticism. The world is a complex, chaotic, electronically charged place these days. We are distracted by so many things, both electronic and social and commercial and entertainment-wise. When we live in this frenetic society, both inside and outside organizations, our distraction takes us away from making connections with people and makes it even more challenging. Secondly, there is a fear. There's a fear of making that close connection, of the emotional result of that. There is a sense of danger when we get really close to somebody else. There's also the idea that I call role perspective. When leaders see themselves as a superior, when leaders see themselves as the boss, when leaders see themselves as in positions of power, and that anything that would move them away from that, serving others per se, really would take away from their role as opposed to strengthen their role. So our very perspective of what we do as leaders gets in the way of us building those kinds of connections. 3 dimensions, and these are the 3 dimensions that form the basis for the leadership connections model in our workshops. Empathy, transparency, and service. These are the three elements that we're going to talk about here today. So what is a real leadership connection? How can you tell if you've got one? So there are three key characteristics, and I would encourage you again to look around your organization to see whether or not these three characteristics exist in the relationships that you have with others. Are they relationships in which you can hear and be heard, truly hear and be heard? I often like to describe a leadership connection as a big pipe between me and you. And it's the diameter of that pipe that really determines whether or not I really have a leadership connection with you. Do you really hear what I have to say? And am I able to really hear what you have to say? Secondly, impact and influence. Do I really matter? Do I have an impact and influence on you? And thirdly, do we act in concert? Do we act together? When I move, you move. Are we really in lockstep, arm in arm, moving towards something, getting things done? Doesn't mean there can't be differences. Doesn't mean there can't be constructive conflict in the work that we do together. But we're both marching arm in arm towards the same goal. Now, this is an interesting list. I encourage you to take a look at this list and make an assessment for yourself. The people around you, the people on your team, do you believe that they really hear you and you really hear them? That you have personal impact and influence in a positive way on them and their work? Do you matter? And lastly, do you feel like they're partners? They're true partners. You're acting and marching in concert. Here's an exercise I would like you to try. And you might actually want to find a private place to do this if you're working in a group. This is probably a little bit sensitive. You may want to share the information after. You may want to share it with the other team members. But this is an exercise that is best done in private first time. What I'm asking you to do is to be very candid with yourself and to rate your connections. Please select 4 people, and maybe make up a chart like you see on the screen here. Select 4 people who need to really perform at their very best for you to do your job. These may be 3 members of your teams. They may be a colleague. They may be, it may be your boss. It may be a coworker. What I'd like you to do is just select 4 people that it is very important for you to have a close, wide diameter pipe connection with. And so just write their 4 names on this chart. Now I'd like you to reflect back on my comment that I believe no connections are neutral. They are either positive, they're advancing your leadership, they're advancing your work, or they are negative. They are detracting from your work, detracting from your leadership in some way. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to rate your current connection with these individuals. Make this like a snapshot, as it is right now, today. What is the quality of your connection with each of these individuals? And what I'm going to invite you to do is to use pluses and minuses. 1, 2, or 3. 1, 2, or 3 pluses and minuses for each individual. I find this gives us a really good sense as to the quality of connection that we have with these individuals, as I've indicated on the sample on the screen. Now, as you look at that, I would suggest that if you could craft an even larger illustration with even more people on it that was replete with plus signs, this would be the measure of great leadership. If you have very, very positive connections all around you in the organization, up and down, across, sideways, this is the trait of the powerful leader today. Let's look at this idea of empathy to start off our conversation as well. There's a couple of myths around this idea of empathy, and quite frankly, I think most of us understand it. We misunderstand what empathy is. I think we see it as something that is more superficial than a leader really needs to understand it as. It's not simply about learning about another person. That is the easy way. When we're truly empathetic, we have this very special and strong sense as to what it feels like to be that person. This comes from patience and intention. In humanity in general, we all can do this, quite frankly, except for sociopaths and people who are stricken with autism for two different reasons. But most of us have the ability to do this. It just takes discipline, practice, and you really need to have the intention to do so. There's a couple of myths around this idea of empathy. And first and foremost, that it's a dangerous path to walk down. That if I really go down this path and I get close to people and I feel what it's like to be them, and I really get into their shoes, I'm going to have to take on some of their problems. I'm going to have to take on their emotions. I'm going to have to fix them in some way. Nothing could be further from the truth. Emotionally strong, emotionally powerful leaders know what is their stuff, and they know what is the stuff of others. And they can feel what it's like to be that person without taking on their problems, without taking on their emotions, and without taking on their issues that need to be fixed. Secondly, either spoken or unspoken, there's a bit of a notion that by being empathetic, we are a bit of a weakling, that empathy is really for priests and counselors and the like. And so the powerful leader is not one who's drawn into that emotional quagmire. Quite frankly, nothing could be further from the truth. If you look at the empathetic leaders, you're looking at a very powerful leader. Whether or not you're in sales, whether or not you're in management in some way, executive leadership, engineering, if you really can feel what it's like to be somebody else, you have an amazing source of power that other people don't have access to. You understand how people hear things. You understand how people make decisions. You'll understand how people react to various communications. You'll have almost a unfair intelligence on the world around you, and enormous leadership power comes from that. Let me just take you through what we call an exercise in empathy. This is challenging to do in a webinar. It's much easier to do in person. But let's take a shot at this. So, if you would please, what I'd ask you to do is to select one member of your team. Just select one member of your team, whoever that might. Doesn't matter who it is. Just one person that you work with on a regular basis, and maybe you want to write their name down somewhere on a piece of paper. Now, what I'd ask you to do is just to make a list of words underneath that person's name. Not our qualities about that person, but a list of words that really describe what it is like to be him or her. So think about this. What if you were actually in that person's shoes? What would it feel like to be that person? So just write down a few words that would give you a sense of, best guess, what would it be like to be him or her? See if you can come up with maybe half a dozen words that would describe that. Now I'm going to ask you to expand on that list. I'm going to ask you to go deeper. I'm going to ask you to really still your heart and mind and thoughts and really focus on this person. What would it be like to be him or her? What really excites this person? What embarrasses this person? What hurts this person? What would this person feel like every time he or she speaks to you? Honestly, candidly, if you were this person and they were in your presence, what would this feel like? What we've done, and my hope is that you have experienced this idea of empathy, and it is a discipline. Now look around you, and as you go through your day, be looking at the leaders around you that even in the moment can stop and really make a connection with somebody else. These are leaders that have disciplined themselves to be empathetic and to stop and to be able to see what it's like to actually be that other person. Now, another close cousin of empathy is the idea of being totally present with people. Empathy and presence go hand in hand. Think about it. How often in this frenetic world do you spend time with people when you're not really with them? Great leaders practice being present with others. They make it a discipline. They quiet their mind, and they actually turn their intentions away from themselves to be with other people. This is a habit that is developed by the great leaders. So when you are with people, it is about being really with them. Now, can you do this? Can you really get into the moment? Can you live in that moment with another person? When you do this, see, we're quite obvious when we're not. People know when we're not there. We can look them in the eye. We can make eye contact. We can do the head bob and nod accordingly. But they know if we haven't brought ourselves fully to them in that moment. I call it becoming actively aware, becoming engaged in the moment, having the discipline to put one conversation away in my mind so that I can concentrate on the conversation that I'm having with the other person. If you're a music lover, you might remember Stephen Stills, a classic rocker from the 70s, still playing wonderful music. He had a song that really has stuck with me for the last 3 or 4 decades, and that's that. The title's on the screen here. Love the one you're with. Love the one you're with. Now, isn't this the theme for leaders who really want to make connections? President Clinton apparently lives by this theme. Now, whether or not you like President Clinton or not, apparently, when you are with him, you are totally with him. If you're with him for 5 minutes, you're totally with him for 5 minutes. If you're having a 30-second conversation, you're having a 30-second conversation, and he is totally with you for that 30 seconds. I'm going to encourage you to try this through the course of one day. So if this doesn't come natural to you, try it through the course of one day. Start first thing in the morning, and every person you have a conversation with, no matter how long it is, bring yourself entirely to bear into that conversation. No matter if the conversation is about ordering office supplies or talking corporate strategy, bring yourself totally to the conversation. And notice how other people react to you. Notice how your connections immediately start to strengthen with these people. Then also notice how good the habit starts to feel. As you do this increasingly frequently, we develop habits of building these connections. The third and last element is this idea of transparency. We do not get to decide if we are seen as authentic leaders. We do not get to decide if we are seen as honest, as leaders of integrity. Others do. And here is the difficult part of this. Unless we show people what we're really like, people make up stories. And what others tend to do, that if they know us over some period of time, and we show them very little, people naturally make up stories that say we have something to hide. Now, I'm not suggesting that we are completely open with all of our feelings, all of our things that we hold dear and confidential with regard to our reaction to things, our belief systems, and the like. I believe we need to be responsible about our transparency. But we also need to be intentional about showing enough about ourselves so that people can connect to us. I love this quote from Joseph Barber Lightfoot. There is no persuasiveness more effectual than the transparency of a single heart, of a single life. Think about this. Leadership is really an inside-out game. We inspire people not just by these grand presentations we make or the great communications. Think about it. We inspire people by sharing parts of ourselves, parts of who we really are. We inspire people. We lead without saying a word sometimes. We lead by simply showing people what is important to us, by being generous with ourselves, by having enough courage to open up the parts of ourselves that give people a really sense of who we are as a human. All leadership is personal. People make connections. Automatons don't make connections. People want to be led by humans. people do not want to be led by robots. If you move to the robot end of the continuum, the more you move to that end of the continuum, the less able you are to make connections with others. So, for you personally, do others know? How much do they know about you? Think about this this list. If I went and did a survey of the people on your team, do they know what your values are? Do they know what your passions are? Do they know what your core beliefs are? Do they know really what you're good at? Do they know what talents you possess? Do they know what you aspire to, both personally and for the organization? Think about this list. How would people make connections with you if they don't know what's important to you? If they don't know what you love to do? If they don't know where you're going or what your personal and team aspirations are? This is the kind of thing that great leaders share, and in doing so, make stronger and more powerful connections with others. Here's what I'd ask you to do. I have an exercise for you. Please try this. So think about this. What are your 3 core values? What 3 things what 3 words would describe your foundational value system? And here's some that you might want to choose from. I've put up a slide that are what we call personal values. We use these in some of our workshops. What I ask you to do is, in this moment, select 3 of these. Which 3 are probably 3 of the most important on here? If there's a word on here or there's a word missing that would represent one of your values, please select it as well. So, what is most important to you? Freedom, duty, justice, diversity, belonging, innovation, variety, spirituality, honor, creativity. I know it's difficult, but select 3. Select 3 that really jump off the page for you. And so here's the challenge. As you look at these 3 words, would others select the same 3 core values for you? Or would they even come close? Or maybe worse yet, would they be very surprised to read your list? Would they be surprised to read your list of what your core values are? This is a litmus test to some degree of your transparency. Kahlil Gibran, a quote of his that I particularly like is this: work is love made visible. So think about that. Work is love made visible. As we make visible what is important to us, we end up with what I call a love affair with our work. And quite frankly, we end up with a love affair of an idea. And when people see us in love with an idea, people want to join us. That's a sense of transparency. There's something they can hook onto. There's something they can join because they see beyond the words on a mission page, a vision document, but they can see the part of us that they can connect with. The third element is this idea of service, the leader as servant. This is a very popular notion these days. There's a lot of talk, a lot written on this idea of servant leadership. But unfortunately, I believe that it's sadly misunderstood by many. Servant leadership is a very, very personal thing. Now, many leaders, when they talk about the idea of servant leadership and when they assess themselves, they look at this idea of servant leadership as their role in maximizing wealth and profits, job security, creating cool work, providing great products for customers and services to the community and the like. These are all noble. These are all noble. But I'm going to encourage you at a connection level to bring it down to a different level. There's nothing wrong with seeing your role at the aggregate level in an organization as somebody who is there to maximize the profits and the job opportunities and the like for everybody in the organization. The however is this: at a personal level, it is much more difficult. Here's the question that I believe we as leaders are all confronting. What are you really prepared to invest, risk, or sacrifice for others? I'd like you to sit with that question for a moment. What are you really prepared to do to invest, risk, or sacrifice for others? When it is difficult to do, are you prepared to do it as a leader? If it's difficult to give, are you prepared to do it as a leader? Here's another exercise for you. If you would draw this chart on a piece of paper, just put you in the middle, put 4 circles around you. And what I would ask you to do is select 4 people, again, in your organization who you work with most closely every day. These may be people you have good relationships with, not particularly good, doesn't matter. 4 people in your organization who you work closely with every day. If you just write their names down. Now, for each of them, if you'd answer the question at the top of the slide, just write it beside each person there. What gift would truly be most appreciated by this individual? What gift, something you haven't given them so far, would be most appreciated by this individual? And I would encourage you to make it sacrificial. Add to that, which difficult to give gift would be most appreciated by this individual? Would it be your presence? Might it be asking for forgiveness? Might it be your coaching? Might it be another opportunity within the organization? Maybe this person is a star performer, and maybe you subtly kept them in that role because that helps you, and you're not willing to let this person go. What gift, if you were in this person's shoes and you could ask for anything from you, what would that gift be? When I lead this exercise in workshops, it tends to be a very dramatic, sometimes jaw-dropping experience for a lot of people. When they're truly honest with themselves and they see what it really takes to be a servant leader, that it's not always an easy gift to give. And many times it's a difficult, challenging, risky, sacrificial gift that makes the most impact on others. And sometimes as leaders, that's the gift that we are called to give if we truly want to be a servant leader. So, as we close this webinar, I'd like to share with you just what we call the practices of extraordinary leaders in this dimension of leadership connections. And this really is a summary of our conversation here today. Number 1, get in the habit of being totally present with others and see life through their eyes. You will be amazed at what you see. You'll be amazed at how you see yourself as a leader through the eyes of others. And this will give you an unfair advantage in the organization. You will have knowledge that no other leader has because you are looking at the world and yourself through an additional set of eyes. Secondly, share yourself with others. Be vulnerable. Within responsible limits, open up that part of yourself that lets people know what's most important to you, what you really value, what excites you, what are you afraid of, what's next for you, what are your aspirations, what are your aspirations for the team, what are your aspirations for the organization, what are your aspirations for yourself. And thirdly, and for many of us, this might be the hardest one, put aside your self-interest. Seek first to serve. Leaders today who make service and sacrifice a habit, I believe, are leaders that are going to excel in the next chapter of our organizations. Increasingly, teams and communities are important within our organizations. Teams and communities are the things that execute and innovate most everything in organizations. Leaders who can be of service to those teams and the individuals in those teams will be the leaders of the next generation. I'm going to close my piece of the webinar with this quote from Woodrow Wilson. You are not here to make a living. You are here to enable the world to live more amply, with greater vision, and with a finer spirit of hope and achievement. You are here to enrich the world. You impoverish yourself if you forget this errand. I would really encourage you to be thinking about that. No matter where you are in the organization, if you are a CEO or a brand new engineer, if you're the receptionist or the site superintendent, my encouragement to you would be to look at leadership and leadership connections at this level. We are here and we are at our very best as leaders when we connect with others and seek to serve them. Thank you for your attendance and attention to the webinar today. Julie?
Thanks, Greg. We want to remind you that this webinar series is drawn from Blue Point's workshop, The Leader Within. This is an in-house, highly engaging development experience which is designed to help leaders at all levels to significantly increase their emotional intelligence and become powerful, positive forces within their teams and organizations. If you'd like more information about The Leader Within or any of Blue Point's workshops, I'd be more than happy to connect with you. So please feel free to reach out to me via email at juliehenry@bluepointleadership.com. Many of you were with us for the first 3 webinars in the series, but just in case you missed them, you can access a recording of the webinars at our website at bluepointleadership.com. Also, be sure to join us as we conclude the webinar series on June 12th with Influencing Others, Shining a Light that Energizes and Inspires. We encourage you to visit our website and register for that webinar today. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.